Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nerd Culture. Not just another episode of Nerd Culture, but the final episode of Nerd Culture that will air in this school year 2020 to 2021. Now, as we all know, this year has been a little bit horrific. It has not been great. It has been very hard for a lot of us. Even though we went through a lot of hardships, there were a lot of things that we as a community accomplished this year. So I'm very sad to see this school year end as well, and I'm gonna miss a lot of people until next year. Now, as a send-off to Nerd Culture, I thought that a nice way to end this little series was to do a ranking of 7 of the TV shows that I was able to watch this year. Now, something I should mention that not all of these TV shows came out in 2021. Some of them came out in years prior, some of them many years prior. But some of them did actually come out this year, and I do want to talk about them. And that is exactly what we are going to do. We are going to have what I call a TV show showdown. I'm working on it. That's what I got right now. So without further ado, let's move on with the ranking. Now we're going to move on to the television shows that I saw this year, although not all of them on television. Some of them are on streaming services like Disney Plus or HBO Max, but these were all shows that I got to see this year. Specifically, I got to see 7 shows this year. And a lot of the shows I'm gonna mention are more shorter, and I'm glad that I was able to watch all of them. So before we get into my list, I recommend that you check a majority of these shows out if you want to. Now let's move on to the initial list. At number 7 we have Harley Quinn, the animated series, specifically season 2, but also season 1. Now the reason why this is lower on my list is because I consider Harley Quinn to be a decent series, but I feel like there's a lot more it could be doing writing wise. Now obviously it fleshes out the character of Harley Quinn very, very well. However, I find that season 2 is definitely better than season 1. I feel season 1, it deals with Harley breaking up with the Joker the whole season, and I feel like after a little while it starts to get a bit tiring. But when season 2 comes along, Harley starts getting to do her own stuff. We get to know her a little bit more outside of her struggles, with the Joker. And season 2 I definitely enjoyed a lot more. There was a lot more varieties in writing and varieties in character in season 2. And with a season 3, I think in development or on the way, I'm excited to see what this team does next for this animated DC series. At number 6, we have WandaVision, a very popular MCU show that came out on Disney Plus this year. Obviously the first MCU show that was able to come out this year on Disney Plus. Now, when I first saw the trailer for WandaVision, I was not expecting to like it as much as I did. I thought it would be, an interesting series, maybe something taking a little bit of that don't hug me, I'm scared vibe, applying it to the MCU, but I didn't think it would be that great. And turns out it was actually very, very well done. And by the time the show was over, there's a lot that you dig up from this, and I feel like this show specifically was a show that was used to develop Wanda or Scarlet Witch as a character, which it did. And the only issue I have with this show is, I feel like I say this a lot, but it's with the writing. And it's not with all the episodes. I think some episodes are legitimately fantastic and very well done in terms of the mystery aspect. But I feel that as soon as they start adding certain characters in and certain other things in, I think it starts to get less and less interesting, but still interesting. But that's what I thought of WandaVision. Overall, I thought it was a good start to MCU, television shows, Disney Plus shows. I thought it was a great little appetizer to start with, and was a bright look in the future for future Disney Plus MCU shows to come. At number 5, we have the show that came after WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, some people will consider this show to be better than WandaVision, like I do. Some people consider it to be worse than WandaVision, like some other people do. And I can see both arguments, but I'm more on the first side of seeing the show as better. Now, while the show isn't without its flaws, I do think one of the villains, the Flag Smashers, can be a little bit of a weak antagonist at times, and I think that they could have done a little bit more with John Walker as a character. I think a couple of the fight scenes are very, very good, and a couple of the fight scenes are not as good. There's a lot of development and chemistry between Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes in this show, more than you really get in the MCU and at all, really. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, plus the social commentary that came with the show. I also enjoyed that a great deal. So overall, I think so far, compared to WandaVision, this is the better MCU Disney Plus show. But as Loki is right around the corner, I guess we'll see which show ends up coming out on top. At number 4, we have HBO's Watchmen. Now, I will say this up front, that if you haven't read the original Watchmen comic written by Alan Moore, or if you know absolutely nothing about it, then I do think this series is going to confuse you a little with some of the plot points that comes along in the series. Now, as a almost sequel to the Watchmen comic in television form, I think the show does the comic justice, although I will not say it's perfect. I think there's a couple of things in the show that could have been rewritten, could have been rearranged. I think a couple aspects of the show could have been taken out or changed, and I think certain aspects of the show should have been broadened and more focused on. I feel that Sister Knight's main character development is just her figuring out things, but as a character she doesn't really have room to change. I do wish that Sister Knight was able to change more as a character and had a character arc. Now, as I said before, the returning characters from the Watchmen comics are all very, very interesting. It's very interesting to see how they all develop as people as they get older. But overall, Watchmen HBO was very well written. I liked the music. The performances by the actors were very well, and I think faithful to the characters. And I thought the world building, especially of the show, is just fantastic. While it's not perfect, I very much enjoyed Watchmen HBO, and if you have read the original comic, I would recommend that you check this out. At number 3, we have HBO's Barry. Bill Hader stars in this series as the main character, but Bill Hader also acts as producer, director, and writer on this show. Now, this show is 2 seasons long, and the episodes themselves are fairly short, but through that time, through those 2 seasons, the show was able to develop a lot of the characters that are brought in, even some of the background characters that don't matter as much. Especially Barry as a character, you see him develop, you see him struggle, you see everything that he goes through, and you see this newfound passion that he has, and you see why he wants to leave his life behind. Again, I'm trying not to go into spoilers just in case someone wants to watch the show, but I think the writing is definitely one of the highlights of the show. There are little hints at the directing that behind the scenes, Bill Hader actually tells the audience what certain directing cues mean. Another aspect I enjoyed of the show was the acting, especially from Bill Hader, who's mainly known as a comedic type of actor. In this show, he's able to shine as a more dramatic actor, and I think he does a fantastic job at that. So I thought Barry was very well done, and was a show that I didn't expect to love as much as I did, similar to WandaVision, except I believe that Barry is better than WandaVision, and I think overall it's just a great show. And with Barry Season 3 hopefully being in development soon and on the way, I can't wait to see what Bill Hader brings to the table next. Now at number 2, we have a show that many people have already heard of, many people have made memes of, I have made a meme of, and that show is Robert Kirkman's Invincible. Started off as a comic in 2003 and was recently made into a show and recently finished its first season. Now, I see a lot of people comparing Invincible to something like The Boys, and while I think that's semi-accurate, I feel like Invincible is definitely less edgier than The Boys. It still has bright comic book-esque type moments, but included with that, you also see that the main character is tested and definitely deals with consequences. One thing that's heavily focused on is that the main character calls himself Invincible after getting newfound powers, but you see that throughout the show, his name Invincible is tested over and over and over again. And there's even a joke in the show that he's quite vincible instead of invincible. I think the character writing is fantastic in the show. There's really only one character that I feel falls a little flat by the end of the show, and that's Amber. Mark Grayson is a great character, along with his mom Debbie and his dad Nolan, and especially Nolan, or Omni-Man, I think is one of the best developed comic book characters that I have ever seen on screen, especially an animated screen. And speaking of animation, I think the animation here is very well done. It's fast and fluid. Invincible as a whole is a refreshing take on a superhero story. Now, while it does have its very gory moments, which I have to warn you about, because the show does deal with consequences, I think the show does a lot for the superhero genre as a whole, and it brings a lot to the table of the superhero genre, almost refreshing it in a way from people who may say they're tired of things like the MCU or, you know, a lot of comic book movies that have come out. So for those types of people, I would say check out Invincible, because I think it brings a lot to the genre. Now at number 1, my favorite show that I was able to watch this year was Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, another animated show on this list. The great thing about this show is that while it's animated, there's no real dialogue to it. It does a great job at developing characters who don't speak. The two main characters are a guy who doesn't speak and a dinosaur that he meets. And like I said before, they do not speak at all, and they get such great development. You see them bond over time. The story was simple enough that I could appreciate what Genndy Tartakovsky was trying to do. While everything else about the show was great, the directing, the cinematography of the animation itself, and the music, definitely the highlight of the show is the animation. So overall, Primal was my favorite show that I saw this year. It's on HBO Max. It's one season. It's about 10 episodes. And if you're one of those people who says animation is just for kids, it can't be mature, it's nothing more than, you know, baby garbage, I think that Primal and Invincible, but mainly Primal, I think it can prove that wrong, because I think Primal just has so much to offer as an animated show and just as media in general. So I think Primal is a great show, is definitely one of my favorite pieces of animation ever, and is probably one of my favorite shows that I've ever watched. Now, I don't know if there's a season 2. I don't think there is a season 2, but if there is going to be a season 2, then I will be there when it releases. So those were my favorite shows to come out this year, and that was the discussion of those things. If you find anything on these lists that I presented that you feel you'll enjoy, or if you got excited to watch a show you've already seen and watch it again, I recommend you do so. And I think just checking out media and films and shows in general is really great, and it's really, in my opinion, fun to analyze them and to see what they do, the little subtle things that the director might do, or things in the background of a shot that might be brought to your attention on a second or third watch. Overall, this year I learned a lot more about things that could be attributed to film, and I've learned to appreciate more smaller details in film as a whole, and it's been a great time here with all of you. Thank you all for watching, and remember, for all things Sailor Nation, we are the Sailor Station.